Good morning, bonjour. My name is Ihsaan Gardee. I serve as the Director of Mobilization and Communications at Amnesty International Canada's English-speaking section. We are headquartered in what is known today as Ottawa, on the unceded, unsurrendered, traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. Their presence here dates back to time immemorial, and we respect and reaffirm the inherent treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. Speaking first today from Mexico City will be my colleague Ana Piquer, America's Director for Amnesty International. Then, Laksamasu Clan Wing Chief Dsta'hyl of the Wet'suwet'en Nation will give remarks, followed by my colleagues David Matsinhe, the Director of Policy Advocacy and Research at Amnesty International Canada's English-speaking section, and then Gabrielle Pauzé, Directrice des Opérations at Amnesty International Canada Francophone, will speak. Also available to answer questions today will be Melik Mengistab Gebrselassie, Amnesty International Canada's Climate Justice and Corporate Accountability campaigner. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ihsaan, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. As my colleague Ihsaan said, my name is Ana Piquer. I am the Regional Director for the Americas at Amnesty International. And this morning, we are here to announce that after careful consideration and extensive research, documentation, and analysis, we have decided to declare the Ksamisu Clan Wing Chief Dsta'hyl of the Wet'suwet'en Nation as the first ever designated Amnesty International prisoner of conscience in Canada. We call for his immediate and unconditional release from house arrest. For over 6 decades, Amnesty International has named prisoners of conscience in countries across the world. Amnesty International considers a prisoner of conscience to be any person imprisoned or otherwise physically restricted solely because of their political, religious, or other conscientiously held beliefs. It can also include people who is imprisoned or physically restrained because of their ethnic origin, sex, color, language, national or social origin, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or other status. A prisoner of conscience is a person who has not used violence or advocated violence or hatred in the circumstances leading to their detention. Today, Canada joins the shameful list of countries where prisoners of conscience remain under house arrest or behind bars. The Canadian state has unjustly criminalized and confined Chief Dsta'hyl for defending the land, water, and rights of the Wet'suwet'en people against the harms of the Coastal GasLink pipeline being built through their ancestral land. In 2018, the British Columbia Supreme Court granted an injunction order at the request of Coastal GasLink to prevent land defenders from taking actions to protect Wet'suwet'en territory against the construction of the pipeline. The pipeline construction is being carried out without the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chief's free, prior, and informed consent in violation of international law. Chief Dsta'hyl, also known as Adam Gagnon, is the first person to be sentenced out of 4 Wet'suwet'en and other Indigenous land defenders who were found guilty of criminal contempt. They were convicted for violating the terms of that injunction order, which Amnesty has determined to be overly broad and unjust. In July 2024, Chief Dsta'hyl was sentenced to 60 days of house arrest on a conditional sentence order. Amnesty International demands his immediate and unconditional release, and we urge Canada to stop the criminalization of Wet'suwet'en and other Indigenous defenders during a global climate emergency. This declaration from Amnesty International of Chief Dsta'hyl as a prisoner of conscience comes amid devastating fires in Alberta and California and elsewhere, disasters that are exacerbated by the harmful effects of fossil fuel projects like these pipelines. Our announcement also comes less than 2 weeks after the global average temperature reached heights that have never been recorded before, and scientists declared 22 July this year to be the hottest day on record. Indigenous peoples are on the front lines of climate change and will face disproportionate harms if humanity fails to move on from burning fossil fuels. States must hold up, not lock up, Indigenous and land defenders like Chief Dsta'hyl and follow their lead towards a healthier, more sustainable future for all. Today, we are honored that Chief Dsta'hyl himself is here, joining us remotely from house arrest. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to him.
Thank you so much. Yeah, as you know that I'm currently at home in house arrest, and one of the things I would like to do is I would just love to just kind of bring through a brief history of the Wet'suwet'en, the Ihsaan and Wet'suwet'en, because we're basically one people, and the resistance that we've had has been for the last 240 years, and what the Canadian government has done is basically put all of us in the last 130 years, put us on reserves and made us prisoners on our own land. So this is one of the things that we are, as Wet'suwet'en people, we've been resisting forever. And when we started the Delgamuukw court case there back in 1971, what happened was, we spent all of that time and millions of dollars to try to get recognition by the government, for our territories. And one of the things that the Delgamuukw court case, as you all know, stated there that our title and rights pre-existed the Crown, the federal and provincial Crown, and has never been extinguished. And yet, since 1997, the Crown has been resisting doing a declaration or giving us our land back. And when you look at the scope of our land, it's very small, compared to what Canada has claimed of Indigenous lands across Canada. It's close to 1 billion square kilometers, and BC has claimed close to 1 million square kilometers. So we're like 2.3% of BC, and they've already taken billions of dollars worth of resources off of our land. And it's up to us as Wet'suwet'en people to nurture the land back to life. And one of the things that we're faced with is, persecution by the government. They're using lethal task force to take us off our land. This is the RCMP, by the way, using lethal, they got sent by the Attorney General there and having a lethal task force basically to try to provoke us into violence, which we have chosen not to do. We've taken the moral high road, and we decided to fight this fight with big spirits as opposed to big guns. And when the lethal task force came in, the arsenal that they brought in was just incredible. They had all kinds of automatic weapons. They had dozens of snowmobiles and helicopters, and they made a big show of it to try to frighten us off our land. But we were not ready to, we've been in the fight, like I said, for 240 years, and we're still here, and we will still be resisting colonization. As one of the things there that, we have to try to protect what little we have left. There's one thing that one of the matriarchs of the Wet'suwet'en said, and I always remember that. She said, you could sell your land, but then the money will all be gone, and what are your children going to inherit? And she said that all we have is a land. Without the land, we are nothing. And it resonates the same at this day and age. All of our over 80% of our land has been clear cut. So the extraction industries have been protected by the government and encouraged to just keep raping the land. And it's up to us as Wet'suwet'en people to protect the land. And we also, as Laksamasu, we've initiated a climate case against the federal government, and that climate case is going to be moving forward. We just heard, in the last month or so that we are going to be moving forward with the climate case, and for the greenhouse gases and for the devastation that's on our territories there from all of the fires and runoff and the displacement of all of the animals that we've lived off for thousands of years. So these are circumstances that we're just giving you a little bit of background about what has happened. And yes, I am, even though I am serving my sentence there, as in house arrest, I am really grateful there for Amnesty International to pick up this, basically a hot ball and run with it there, because it's important there that the world knows the unjust treatment of First Nations people in Canada, and how, the whole RCMP was created to keep us, under thumb, and make sure that we didn't cause any problems there for while they were doing all of the extraction of all of our resources. So these are things that we're faced with, and even though we have a fairly decent life on the reservations, we've only we were forced into entitlement, and we've been suffering 6-7 generations of entitlement. And it's important for people to know that we've only got enough to survive, not to thrive, from the government. Even though they've taken billions and billions of dollars of resources, our communities are still borderline, in poverty. So these are things that are in circumstances we have to change as Wet'suwet'en people. And in order to do that, we do need our land back, and we need to be able to exploit what little resources are left, for our own keeping, and making sure that all of our herbal plants and all of our animals are protected. And our fish is one of the most important, and that's one of the things that Coast and GasLink did, is they went through some of our most treasured, salmon habitat that we were trying to protect for years. So these are things that we're faced with, and I just again thank Amnesty International there for picking up the ball and running with it. Thank you so much. I don't know how much time I got, but you give me a cue there. When...
Thank you, Chief Dsta'hyl. Members of the press, Canadian public, and the international community, we stand before you today in a moment of urgent and profound injustice. The criminalization of these brave land defenders is a blatant and assault of Indigenous rights, a stain on Canada's conscience, and a sinister chapter in the history of human rights in this country. Declaring Chief Dsta'hyl of the Wet'suwet'en a prisoner of conscience is a grave and solemn designation for what it represents. His conviction and home imprisonment sends a chilling message to all Indigenous peoples in Canada. Defending your rights and ancestral land is a crime, and you will be punished for it. Yet, the bravery of the Wet'suwet'en land defenders in the face of such injustice is truly inspiring to all of us. What does this mean? It means if the remaining land defenders are convicted and imprisoned, Amnesty International will have no choice but to designate them as well prisoners of conscience. That must be very clear. Canada, a nation that prides itself on its commitment to human rights globally, is failing Indigenous people right here at home. The persecution of the Wet'suwet'en is a flagrant violation of their right to self-governance, to protect their land and resources, and to live in peace and dignity in their own homes. Therefore, we call for immediate and unconditional release of Chief Dsta'hyl and drop of all criminal contempt charges, against Wet'suwet'en land defenders. Respect for the Wet'suwet'en nation's inherent right to self-governance are entitled to their ancestral lands, and to the harassment, intimidation, surveillance of the Wet'suwet'en land defenders. Respect and protect their right to free, prior, and informed consent when developing business projects in their indigenous territories. This is the bare minimum that Canada can guarantee under its international obligations. This is not simply a matter of indigenous rights. It is a test of Canada's commitment to decolonization, justice, equality, and the rule of law. The world is watching. The time for empty promises is over. We demand action. The Wet'suwet'en people deserve nothing less than justice and respect. I'll yield the floor to my colleague, Gabrielle.
Merci, David. Chers membres des médias, Chef Dsta'hyl, Anna, chers collègues, public canadien et membres de la communauté internationale, bonjour. Je suis non seulement attristée, mais surtout profondément outrée qu'on en soit encore là en 2024, qu'Amnesty International doive nommer, pour la première fois de l'histoire, un prisonnier d'opinion au Canada. Dans un contexte où le gouvernement du Canada et ses différentes instances évoquent et martèlent les termes réconciliation, décolonisation, reconstruction, force est de constater que ce sont des mots qui sont pris à la légère. Monsieur le Premier ministre Justin Trudeau, il faut agir et prêcher par l'exemple. Vous, qui vous êtes engagé à mener à bien la réconciliation avec les peuples autochtones, je saisis l'occasion de vous rappeler que vous portez atteinte à la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme et à la Charte canadienne des droits et libertés, qui énonce clairement que toute personne a le droit à la liberté de réunion et d'association pacifique. Vous semblez également oublier la Déclaration des Nations unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones, approuvée par le Canada en 2016, selon laquelle les peuples autochtones ont le droit de posséder, de développer leurs terres, territoires et ressources. Monsieur le Premier ministre, les violations de droits humains ne cessent de s'accumuler. Non seulement la construction de l'oléoduc Coastal GasLink s'est faite sans le consentement préalable, libre et éclairé de la nation Wet'suwet'en, mais l'injonction qui a mené à la condamnation du Chief Dsta'hyl va à l'encontre du droit international. Et enfin, l'assignation à résidence à laquelle a été condamné le Chief Dsta'hyl est un affront inacceptable à vos engagements et une violation flagrante de ses droits. Pour un pays qui s'enorgueillit de son engagement en faveur des droits humains à l'échelle mondiale, le Canada fait bien piètre figure et manque clairement et effrontément à ses obligations envers les peuples autochtones ici même. Le gouvernement et ses instances ont pris un engagement avec la loi canadienne sur la Déclaration des Nations unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones que je cite. Les droits et les principes confirmés dans la Déclaration constituent les normes minimales nécessaires à la survie, à la dignité et au bien-être des peuples autochtones. Dans un contexte de l'urgence climatique que l'on connaît et de l'engagement du gouvernement à une transition juste et équitable, cette survie s'applique à l'humanité tout entière. Il est grand temps que cessent définitivement toutes les discriminations envers tous les peuples autochtones sur l'ensemble du territoire canadien. Monsieur le Premier ministre, les traités auxquels le Canada est parti et les lois canadiennes doivent être respectés. Je terminerai par demander au Premier ministre Justin Trudeau et au ministre de la Sécurité publique, Dominique Leblanc, la libération immédiate et inconditionnelle du prisonnier d'opinion, Chief Dsta'hyl. À vous tous et toutes qui êtes parmi nous aujourd'hui, c'est le temps d'agir et je vous invite à vous rendre sur les sites amnesty.ca ou amnesty.ca pour signer la pétition sans plus tarder. Pour conclure, je m'adresse à vous, Chief Dsta'hyl, chef du clan L'Iksamasu. À vous aussi, chers membres de la nation Wet'suwet'en, le mouvement Amnesty International tout entier, fort de ses 10 millions de personnes, vous soutient. Sur ce, je vais maintenant ouvrir la période de questions. Merci.
Ian Bailey, Globe and Mail. What specific impact are you hoping this designation will have on the federal government and as well as the BC government?
Thank you. For a very long time, there's been this global perception that everything is well in Canada, being the first world nation. The reality, of course, is for a very long time, everything has not been so well in Canada, especially for Indigenous peoples within their own territories. We are hoping that with this designation, we challenge that perception, we burst that myth that everything is correct within Canada. If you look at the living conditions, whether it's social, economic, political, and environmental conditions within which Indigenous peoples in Canada live in their territories, you would question yourself whether you are still in the first world country. This is the conscience of Canadians, the federal government, and the government of British Columbia that we want to appeal to. Thank you.
Peut-être, Madame Pauzé, si vous pouvez répondre à cette question-là, vous attendez quoi? Vous espérez que cette déclaration change quoi essentiellement auprès du gouvernement?
En fait, comme le chef Dsta'hyl le mentionnait, la nation wet'suwet'en, depuis que la construction de l'oléoduc est en cours, a décidé d'agir de façon pacifique pour protéger ses territoires, ses ressources. Ils ont fait ça de façon consciente. Ils ont maintenu le tir tout au long. Puis on se retrouve aujourd'hui dans une situation où il y a une criminalisation des défenseurs de la terre. Puis ça, au Canada, en 2024, franchement, le mouvement Amnesty International juge et trouve que c'est absolument inacceptable. Et c'est pour ça que le chef Dsta'hyl et potentiellement, évidemment, les autres défenseurs de la terre qui attendent un procès en septembre seront éventuellement aussi déclarés prisonniers d'opinion si la situation se maintient.
Gagnon, CBC News. For a long time and for a lot of people, prisoners of conscience are associated to, say, people who have been detained without trial or who have been tortured. Chief Dsta'hyl is serving a 60-day sentence in his home. He did receive a trial. I guess I'm wondering, is this a broadening of what you consider prisoners of conscience as Amnesty International? And are you comfortable with this designation at this time?
I'm going to pass that over to my colleague Anna Piquer in the Americas section. Anna?
Sure. Prisoners of conscience have always referred to not necessarily a person that has been tortured. It has to do with people who are imprisoned or deprived of their liberty because they said what they said, not because they have committed any crime, not because they have done anything. They have not incurred in any way in violence or promoted violence in the circumstances leading to their arrest. And this is not the first time we have designated prisoners of conscience based on a house arrest measure, because it is a way of depriving a person of liberty. And it's a person that should not have their liberty deprived under no circumstances, because all they did was to exercise their human rights. And that is the case of Chief Dsta'hyl as well. And we wanted to highlight that it's not just house arrest. We cannot leave it at that. It is a deprivation of liberty that should not happen. And that he is not the only case that is in risk of getting that. So I want to be very clear that we cannot take this lightly. And yes, maybe you can find examples of cases that are so-called worse, but that does not mean that we should take lightly what is going on with Chief Dsta'hyl and other Wet'suwet'en and Indigenous land defenders in Canada.
Dylan Robertson from the Canadian Press. I'm wondering what Amnesty's response is when people look at this and say it's civil disobedience. That's part of what you agree to, is you might get arrested. This is how protests and movements work. You consent to the idea that you might have your liberty deprived because you're trying to make a point here. The chief has been arrested on a mischief charge. You could say this is a freedom of expression, but can you walk me through the thinking for when Canadians look at this and say, okay, he did the crime, he's doing the time, this is what our courts say. How is this a prisoner of conscience? Like, what would be your response to that kind of character of comment?
Thank you for that question. It is very important to recognize that what the Wet'suwet'en land defenders did is within their right, within the Canadian legal framework, the Charter of Rights, within the Constitution of Canada. And above that, these are rights that are protected under international law, international human rights law, to which Canada is signatory. Canada has signed, ratified, and domesticated those instruments in its own domestic legislation, making commitments that they will honor these rights. So these must not be taken lightly. Somebody in the past has said the threat against human rights anywhere is a threat against human rights everywhere. And somebody has also said indigenous peoples all over the world have been prisoners of conscience since the beginning of colonization. Let's recognize that this is not light. It's a big issue that has been occurring for a very, very long time. Thank you.
Just the chief want to respond.
The chief
want to respond to that.
The chief would like to say something as well.
We'll pass it over to you, Chief Dsta'hyl.
Okay. Yes, one of the things I'd like to make very clear too is that the Wet'suwet'en people have had laws that extend back thousands of years. And one of the things that we're faced with there is when we just didn't do what we did on the territory with Coastal GasLink without giving a great deal of thought. Like they've ignored basically all of our trespass laws, and all of our chiefs had unanimously signed an eviction notice for CGL. And that was because the courts would not recognize our defense there when we tried to argue that that there was no consent in order for what CGL did. The government and the province, both governments, province and federal, have just pushed industry, to negotiate with band councils, which are basically a puppet government for the federal government. And what happens is the band councils have no jurisdiction other than the 2 square miles on each reserve, because that's back in the early 1900s, all of the reserves we were still in the imperial system there, where everything was measured in miles. But one of the things there that we would like to everybody to know is that I was enforcing that eviction notice when I was arrested, and what the RCMP was doing was obstruction of justice, because we were dealing with that Wet'suwet'en justice by moving, just basically seizing equipment there that has been destroying our lands. So this is the long and short of it.
Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions sur Zoom. Si vous avez une question, s'il vous plaît, utilisez la fonction main levée, comme à l'habitude, une question de suivi. We will now take questions on Zoom. As usual, 1 question, 1 follow-up. Please use the raise hand function. Mélanie Marquis, la parole est à vous.
Merci. Je pense que la question irait à Madame, Madame Pauzé. un peu dans la foulée de ce que mes collègues Dylan et je ne me rappelle plus qui a posé la question. Mais bref, quand on pense à des prisonniers d'opinion, on pense par exemple à Raïf Badawi, on pense à des cas extrêmes comme ça. Comment est-ce que vous expliquez à la population qu'Amnesty Amnesty International, sans vouloir minimiser l'expérience du chef, choisissent aujourd'hui de le mettre dans le même panier, entre guillemets?
Bien, en fait, la situation des peuples autochtones au Canada, dans l'ensemble, mériterait ce statut-là. On parle de personnes qui sont criminalisées pour défendre des terres, des ressources, un territoire qui leur appartient, alors qu'au Canada, on a des lois qui garantissent qu'ils peuvent accéder et utiliser ces terres, ces territoires, ces ressources-là. Donc, clairement, il se passe quelque chose dans le système en ce moment où il y a un non-respect des lois canadiennes, des traités internationaux en la matière, puis sur les droits des peuples autochtones. Alors, il y a urgence d'agir, non seulement en ce qui concerne le chef Dsta'hyl, mais aussi en ce qui concerne les 3 autres personnes qui vont subir un procès à l'automne et qui risquent le même sort. De se ramasser avec un dossier, d'être judiciarisé, d'être condamné, que ce soit pour une assignation à domicile ou peu importe la peine, fait en sorte qu'Amnesty International juge qu'il est important de désigner ces personnes-là comme étant des prisonniers d'opinion.
Il y a évidemment la question des systèmes judiciaires aussi. Monsieur, dans la décision rendue en 2024 là, par la Cour suprême, le juge Tamen disait que monsieur, en fait, le camp du chef aurait pu faire appel, donc faire appel de cette injonction-là. Pourquoi est-ce que ça n'a pas été fait? Et puis, pour l'avenir, est-ce qu'il y a d'autres avenues juridiques? Est-ce que vous pensez peut-être vous rendre jusqu'en Cour suprême dans ce dossier?
Amnesty International va soutenir les souhaits de la nation wet'suwet'en dans ce dossier-là pour un appui éventuel à d'autres démarches. Mais c'est certain que c'est un dossier que nous, chez Amnesty International, on suit depuis 2020. On a fait des recherches sur le terrain, on a rencontré énormément de membres de la communauté. Ils ont eux-mêmes fait des démarches à différentes occasions, mais il y a un rebut, il y a une difficulté pour eux d'accéder. Puis je reviens quand même à une loi canadienne, la loi sur la DNU-DPA, la Déclaration des Nations unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones, qui dit que le gouvernement du Canada a le devoir de veiller à ce que les peuples autochtones puissent justement avoir recours à l'ensemble de leurs droits dans un respect, puis dans un respect aussi des institutions juridiques autochtones et non autochtones.
Ihsaan Gardee, the floor is yours.
Thank you for taking our questions. Have any other cases of people designated as prisoners of conscience resulted in unconditional releases?
Anna? I think I'll pass it over to our colleague Anna in Mexico.
Yes, in fact, yes. I don't have a statistic with me right now, but it's a campaigning technique in the end that we have used all over the world and that has allowed for releases in many countries for decades now. And the main key to success has to do with the fact that we bring the eyes of the whole world to the case. As you probably know, Amnesty International is a movement with millions of people all over the world supporting what we do. And when we name a prisoner of conscience, the eyes of all those people get directed to the case and to the injustice that the person is living with. And that's a pressure that governments find difficult to live with in many cases. So we do have cases of liberations in Venezuela recently. We have a couple, and so we are hopeful that this will support, as I said before, not only Chief Dsta'hyl, but also all the other Wet'suwet'en and land defenders that are criminalized right now in Canada.
In Amnesty International's view, is this prisoner of conscience designation also about spotlighting Canada's resource extraction industry and climate change?
Over to my colleague Malak Gebrselassie online.
Thank you so much. Is there an echo? Thanks so much for the question. Yes, as my colleagues mentioned, Chief Dsta'hyl is one of the 4 Wet'suwet'en and other indigenous land defenders to be found guilty of criminal contempt charges, and he's the first one to be sentenced. There are currently other Wet'suwet'en and other indigenous land defenders awaiting for their sentence hearing, and we would like to highlight there is an ongoing systemic suppression of indigenous resistance against projects that bulldoze through their territory, affecting their waters and their land, and there is a strong tie to climate justice. Yeah, that's a good observation.
Does Anna, do you want to weigh in? Or?
Well, thank you. The usual perception globally, as I was saying at the beginning, is that it's only in the global south or the so-called third world where we see multinational corporations doing and undoing as they please without any form of accountability, in conspiracy with local governments that respect no rights of local communities that are the hosts of these extractive activities. Lo and behold, you look into indigenous territories, you don't see that much of a difference. Indigenous territories, when it comes to extracting their resources, the behavior of these companies and in collaboration with the government has always been as if they are in third world territories. So these are pockets of injustices that Canadians and the world do not get to see. And we're here today to let you know it's happening. Open your eyes, look and see and call out those injustices. Thank you.
Diana Gonzalez, la parole est à vous. Diana, on ne vous entend pas. Nous allons maintenant passer à Julie Landry. La parole est à vous.
Oui, bonjour. La question pour Madame Pauzé. Avez-vous espoir que ce genre de campagne, en regardant ce qui a déjà été fait ailleurs, en fait, c'est une question en français qui a déjà été posée, que ce genre de campagne aura un effet ici au Canada?
On espère certainement que ce genre de campagne-là aura un effet positif au Canada, puis qui est un effet qui aidera à faire levier pour que la criminalisation des défenseurs des droits de la terre cesse de façon définitive au Canada.
Je vais poser une deuxième question. Est-ce que ce genre de campagne fonctionne?
Ce genre de campagne, effectivement, qui est éprouvé, qu'on a vu fonctionner dans d'autres pays, entre autres au Venezuela. Il y a plusieurs exemples. C'est certain, quand on regarde un mouvement comme Amnesty International, un mouvement de 10 millions de personnes qui a une crédibilité, qui travaille sur le terrain, qui travaille main dans la main avec les communautés concernées, on espère sincèrement que ça aura l'effet escompté.
Ihsaan Gardee, please go ahead.
Yeah, Isaac Pandey, CBC News. You mentioned that you're hoping this designation has an effect for the other Wet'suwet'en land defenders awaiting judgment. I was hoping you could expand on that. How do you hope this affects administration of justice for those land defenders and land defenders onwards?
I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Malak online.
Thank you so much, Isaac. I don't know if I introduced myself earlier. My name is Malak. I am the Corporate Accountability and Climate Justice Campaigner for Amnesty International Canada, the English-speaking section. Yes, this word we are hoping as a human rights organizations, shaming and naming and galvanizing and mobilizing public support both internationally and nationally has been part of our way of influencing decisions in favor of international human rights protections and promotions. Now, with that in mind, both Chief Dsta'hyl and other indigenous land defenders, Wet'suwet'en and other indigenous land defenders have been criminalized by using the same injunctions that through our research in 2023, we decided to be unjust on so many grounds because it's overbroad. It restricts the exercise of both individual rights, including freedom of assembly and their right to exercise their cultural rights on their territory. That includes self-government and the protection of their land from any kind of industrial encroachments without their free and prior informed consent. So everything ties back to that unjust injunctions, whether for Chief Dsta'hyl and for other convicted, for other Wet'suwet'en land defenders who have been found guilty for trespassing the injunction. So we are hoping an increased pressure, both locally and internationally, would sway the Canadian government to reconsider using an injunction to enforce development, quote unquote, development policies on Indigenous land. Thank you, Isaac.
Do you have a follow-up question, Isaac?
I was wondering if Chief Dsta'hyl, like if you have any thoughts on how you're hoping that this designation helps other people who stood with you.
Yes, I think that it's really important to point out there that the Wet'suwet'en are not the only ones that are subjected to this type of abuse. There's also the Trans-Canada Pipeline and all the First Nations all up and down that pipeline where they are planning on shipping bitumen. And when we had, little over a year ago, when we had all those big rains, massive amounts of that pipeline got washed out. And they're still going ahead, and these are salmon-bearing streams there that we're dealing with, and these pipelines got washed out. And if they had the bitumen in there, that would have destroyed all of the fish habitat, all down their main corridor. And one of the things that we're faced with is that, and you're looking at Fairy Creek as well, all the Indigenous people that are convicted at Fairy Creek where they were trying to protect old growth forests. These are people there that are being heavily impacted by, the unjust judicial system of the Canadian government. What they do is anytime that the First Nations have a win in court, they move the goalposts. They legislate those out so that we can't use the same arguments in future court cases. So these are problems there where it's not just affecting the Wet'suwet'en, it's affecting all First Nations right across Canada. And I think that what Amnesty is doing, I think it's just bringing the focus on the actual problem that we're faced with today. And it's not just the climate, it's not, but it's everything. It's basically the basic human right that you guys talked about. We are faced with just having that deprived as being First Nations, that basic human rights is being deprived from us. Thank you so kindly.
Diana Gonzalez, la parole est à vous. Malheureusement, on ne vous entend pas. Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci, c'est ce qui conclut la...
Can I just ask one last question of the chief? I just want to clarify the criminal history right now. I understand that it's a 2-month sentence for a mischief charge, for a contempt charge. And are there any other outstanding charges that the court hasn't heard at this point? There's conflicting information online. And I think he's frozen.
So it's criminal contempt for violation of the terms of the injunction. And these charges are the same across the board, across all the land defenders, the 4 land defenders. It just so happens that Chief Dsta'hyl is the first of the 4 land defenders to be charged and sentenced.
And I think the chief is back online now. Just asking the chief if it's a 2-month sentence for contempt of court, and if there are any other charges that you're facing that haven't yet been heard in court.
Can the chief Chief Dsta'hyl, can you hear Dylan on the mic? If not, David, could you repeat on the question on the mic? I don't know whether Chief can hear.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to tell.
Mm-hmm. Chief Dsta'hyl, you had the question?
I heard the question.
Yeah, please respond.
Yeah, I heard the question, and no, I've never been criminally charged for anything in my life. You know, I've been basically respect all good laws. You know, when you look at good laws, it's laws there that the word good is a abbreviation of God. To be good is to be godlike. And you look at our spirituality as Wet'suwet'en people on our lands. The land is a part of us, and we belong to the land. The land is us, and I've always been told as a chief, you know, to make sure that you keep your blanket clean, meaning there that when you have a regalia, you have to respect it, and that you will never do anything to dishonor it. And I don't believe that by me becoming an enforcement officer and enforcing trespass laws, that, you know, I was well within my rights and I was not doing anything unjust. And that's why I say the RCMP, you know, was obstructing justice when they stopped me from enforcing, you know, Wet'suwet'en trespass laws.
The rest is 2 months, right?
Yes, a 60-day sentence, and I got certain privileges there just for my health reasons there because of some other circumstances that I'm going through health-wise.
Merci, c'est ce qui conclut la conférence. Thank you. This concludes the press conference.